Hello, my name is Mo Darboe, and today I'll be answering the important question: to what extent was World War I a turning point in the treatment of soldiers? As injury increased due to technological advancements in the Great War, this resulted in better medicine and fewer deaths in comparison to the amount of injury. But it also left more soldiers maimed for life, leading the way to a prosthetic boom. World War I led to many discoveries in the medical field that are still rampant today. World War I was a turning point in treating soldiers by virtue of rapid development in medical innovation. Since medical personnel were unprepared, the advancements in facial surgeries and the negative impact it had on soldiers' lives after the war as they were shunned by society. The Great War introduced a new type of war as many new weapons and technology arose. The total number of military and civilian casualties was about 40 million, 20 million resulting in death, and 21 million resulting in wounds. The Entente powers lost about 5.7 million soldiers and the Central Powers with 4 million soldiers, says the HistoryGov census. With death and injury everywhere, the need for medical attention was vast, and recon aids played the crucial role of developing modern physical therapy of recovering service members, says World War I Museum and Memorial. As newer and more lethal weapons like shrapnel from artillery and trench warfare led to an exponential increase in facial surgeries, surgeons and medics received a flurry of new techniques for treating wounds which saved many lives that would have resulted in death a couple years prior. World War I was a war thought to be over in just a couple months, but ended up raging on for 4 years. As new technology increased, ways of treating soldiers changed, and medical personnel were unprepared for what confronted them due to the sheer number of wounded as well as the natural wounds. Neat holes from ammunition were now replaced by jagged artillery shrapnel, forcing medical personnel to adapt rapidly. Weapons like mustard gas, flamethrowers, and machine guns depicted injuries that were highly uncommon in war in the past, and no one was prepared for what was to come. When German surgeon Tom Pritchard saw the catastrophic death, he almost quit on his first day due to the amount of work he had on his plate. When he went to look for his patients in the medical tent, he saw train after train arriving and dumping its load of wounded with no one to attend to them. After trying to count the number of patients at the station and losing track, Pritchard and his team worked ravenously. Surgeons were greatly overwhelmed and had to adapt quickly and accordingly, and sometimes they had to stitch together ends of large wounds and just hope for the best. Even the most experienced medical surgeons had rough times during the war. John Hayward, an experienced surgeon, was frightened by some of the wounds he saw. On his first day, he had to perform surgery on about 100 patients and 200 that were mustard gassed the next day. To relieve pressure from medical personnel, surgeons like Norman T. Kirk came out of retirement as they realized the need for medics. Kirk was assigned to a hospital for surgical service and was credited with treating a third of major amputations during World War I. As World War I raged on and piles of death accumulated, there was a turning point in the treatment of soldiers through facial surgeries. Before the Great War, facial surgeries were relatively low in demand because facial reconstruction was not popular for surgeons. Hippolyte Morriston, a highly talented surgeon, welcomed the most gruesome of patients who were neglected by the rest of society. His experience in tumor surgery was exceptionally extensive, and everything he wrote on the subject was of great benefit to surgeons. Not only was facial surgery crucial in World War I, but common items that we see today were also extremely important. Canes and wheelchairs provided support in the recovery process of battlefield traumas. Without them, how might a soldier whose leg got blown off be able to move on with his life after the war? Facial prosthetist Anna Coleman Ladd created masks for soldiers out of facial casts. She made over 100 masks during her time as a medic in France. Anna Coleman was one of the greatest plastic surgeons of her time, as she helped regain the lives of countless French soldiers. Another well-known medical worker was Augustus Charles Valadier, a Franco-American dentist who did forms of plastic surgery. Valadier helped rebuild a man's jaw after it had been blown off his face. He started by carving the shape of the jaw, then cut a piece of skin, usually from the chest, and sewed and shaped it. With the help of Valadier, the soldier was able to live a standard life. In 2 cases with fractured mandibles, Valadier performed distraction osteogenesis to help stimulate new bone growth. This was the first time this method was ever used on the face, which just shows how far ahead of his time Valadier was. As soldiers became to face through trench warfare, not all surgeons had solutions to restoring faces. Although medical discovery did rise drastically, after soldiers were injured, many of their lives after the war were ruined. At first glance, a victim often looked like a grotesque monster. Such mutilations evoked pity, disgust, and repulsion. But what about the spirit and soul inside of the defaced soldier? Along with their face, their soul was also a victim, and the soldier was stripped of dignity and humanity. Here is Aaron Shaheen, author of Great War Prosthetics in American Literature and Culture, to give an example from 1920 after the war of the life of a soldier in World War I.
One example from 1920. So the war has only been over technically for a year. About one of the more prominent forms of amputation and disfigurement to come out of the Great War. And this would be facial amputation and disfigurement for two reasons. The first is the long-range shelling. Those shells would explode, often with shrapnel in them, and it rendered the entire body vulnerable, and especially the face. The other reason is in the nature of trench warfare, that as a doughboy might look up over a trench and expose his head over the parapet, he's an easier target for sniper fire. Martin Howe found himself staring in a face that still had some of the chubbiness of boyhood. Between the pale brown eyes, where the nose should have been, was a triangular black patch that ended in some mechanical contrivance with shiny metal rods that took the place of the jaw. So this really becomes Martin Howe's initiation, even before he's actually been to the front, in seeing this young man come back from the war looking somewhat similar to what we see here.
As you can see, although soldiers' lives were saved due to the prosthetics and facial surgeries, it did not by any means mean they were not neglected by the rest of the world. Surgeons fiercely attempted to close over gaping wounds, but faces still looked horrid and men inhuman. Often, swallowing was impossible, so feeding tubes were inserted into gullets and into the stomach. One boy was shot through the face sideways, and the piece of shell left a fringe of his lip hanging down to his chest. He could no longer speak and questioned doubtingly whether he would ever talk again. Many soldiers' lives ended up alike in how society cut them off because they were seen for who they were on the outside rather than on the inside. At the time,
talk about one of the more
prosthetics were simply made to support parts of the body and improve daily function and appearance. However, the efforts and advancements of prosthetics were not enough to restore and reconstruct the faces of soldiers, as jagged fragments of bursting shells sheared off countless noses, ears, and jaws. Victims were left as a permanent object of repulsion. In conclusion, the catastrophes of World War I, by large part the development of new weapons and technology, led to a turning point in the treatment of soldiers because it helped medical personnel learn to adapt quickly in times of crisis. It led the way to discoveries in the field of prosthetics like facial surgeries, and although it saved the lives of many soldiers, it damaged them for life, leaving them on the outside of society looking in. Although the war did not end well for many, it became a learning experience and brought about many discoveries crucial to our world.